You could spend more and have your brakes come in fancy boxes, or you could save more and have them delivered in plastic bags. Up to you, really. Although I gotta admit, this is a pretty cool looking box. Hey folks, we're back again with another video, and this is part of our new bike build series, and today we're going to be installing brakes. So there's three main options for buying brake systems. One of them is to buy them brand new in a retail package. Comes with a box and everything inside the box that you will need. Two, a brand new OEM package. No box, everything comes in plastic bags, but you will have just about everything you need. Three, you buy them off the used market. Nothing wrong with buying brakes off the used market, guys. I've done it before, works great as long as the brakes are in good condition. And two, the most important thing, make sure the cable lengths work for your frame. Some people cut them really short, guys, so they might not be able to be taken from one frame to another one. So verify that. The biggest difference between buying them retail and buying OEM, you're going to save a lot of money off OEM. To give you an idea, these are Shimano XTR 9100 brakes, back, front. Each one of these cost around a $325 mark retail price. Now, I would never recommend anybody buy brakes for the retail price. At a minimum, buy them with a 20% discount coupon and save the money. This OEM package, the way you see it over here, cost me around the $310 mark. That's a significant cost savings, even for an OEM package, because usually these are around $350 off the OEM space. Now, that's the nice thing about OEM as well, is that prices fluctuate throughout the year. So sometimes they'll be more expensive, other times they'll be less expensive. It all depends on how much stock is out there, right? Whereas the retail space is way more controlled. I bought these a while ago. I didn't even need them, but I knew I was going to use them eventually. And at this price, I couldn't let them go. Now, could I save even more money if I bought different model brakes, like, I don't know, XTs, SLXs, SRAM equivalents? Yeah, sure. But for our local trails, which are pretty much XC oriented, these XTRs have proven to work great for me, the way I ride on my local trails, and that is super, super important. Make sure you buy brakes that make the most sense for you, the way you ride on your local trails and your budget. If you mainly ride in bike parks, I would never recommend these brakes. You're going to need something way more aggressive, to give you an example, right? Either way, the cost savings buying OEM cannot be ignored. The same brakes, you save a significant amount of money, and ultimately you can take that money and spend it somewhere else. Go on a trip, do something with it, right? So with all that being said, let's get into some tools and parts needed to install these brakes. Not that many tools needed for this job. For starters, we're going to need a 4mm Allen to lock down the bolts on the caliper and the lever, right? Now, there's a clamp on a fork. We're going to need a 2.5mm Allen to loosen it, put the cable in, and then tighten that clamp back down so the cable sits tight on the fork. Then we're going to have to figure out how much cable we want to cut. You could do it by eye, but measuring tape comes in handy, and we're going to need to cut the cable. Two options over here. You don't need both of these, right? It's either or. These are old cable cutters. They still make them. I don't find them as useful. I never really liked it, to be honest. It works great, don't get me wrong, but sometimes they just don't cut as even as you would think. Now, I think most people use these. These are real cheap. You could find them online. They're little slicers. It's great. You just you measure what you want, put the cable in, and just slice it off, and it's always straight. Very consistent straight cuts with these guys. And after we cut them, a pick comes in handy to make sure that the hole inside is nice and round, so we could put our barb in. And as far as putting the barb, we have these barb insertion tools now. In the old days, we used to clamp down the cable and tap in the barb with a hammer. Now you just take the cable, put it in here with the barb, basically lock it all down, and then screw the barb in. Super simple. You'll see this later. Again, super easy. I love this tool. And then we want to permanently lock the cable down to the lever. We're going to need an 8mm wrench. That should be it. If there's anything that I'm missing, I don't think I am. We'll definitely go over it later. All right, so let's install some brakes. First thing we're going to do is open everything up, right? So let's take everything out of the packages and prep it all for install. There are a couple of details we're going to need to do before we put it on the bike. That was wrapped up good. And the front. We are going to need these caps for sure. We're going to need these two bolts, but I'm going to put this whole thing on the side for now, along with the olives. I'm going to put them on the side. So again, we have our rear brake. In this case, I do have a mount to extend for a larger rotor. I won't be needing this on this bike. 160 for my rear is more than enough. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but I just can't think of one right now. Okay, we are going to need these screws. I'm going to put this guy on the side. I don't need them on my front because my fork is already set for a 180 millimeter. That's all I need for my XC bike is 180 in the front, right? So that guy's ready. We have our brake levers. Now, the brake levers have a stop. They will come with oil inside, but we're going to have to bleed them no matter what. So if you pull this out, some oil might spill out. This is a stop. It's a block. Just pull it straight out. Just like that, okay? Just in case some people don't know how to remove that. Just literally take them and pull them straight out, just like that. And again, this guy comes out too. Just be careful with them because oil might come out with it. It's literally just holding in oil. So I would leave them in here for now until we plug up both ends. First, we'll measure, cut if needed, and then we'll take them out so we don't spill oil all over the place, right? So that's pretty much it. And again, if you want, we're going to need these because I'm pretty sure we're going to need to cut a little bit. From this package over here, the only thing I'm going to end up using is, well, the covers for each one. And since I already have 2 of these screws for my rear, or bolts for the rear, I'm going to need 2 for the front. I don't need the longer ones because, again, mine is already set up. My fork is already set up for a 180 rotor. I'm going to go with a 180, so the small regular size ones will do. And here, I don't need anything else. I'm not going to use these wired things. They're used to secure the bolts. I've never used them, to be honest, guys. So I'm going to put that on the side. So we're going to be installing these brakes on an IBIS Ripley V4S frame. So this frame has full internal cable routing, front to back. And it's the good version where you have tubes that connect the hole. So if I feed a cable in one hole, it'll automatically come out the hole on the other side, as opposed to many frames that you put the cable in a hole and then you have to find the cable and figure out a way to feed it through the hole on the other side. There's ways to simplify that, but we're not going to get into that in this video. When it comes to internal cable routing, I got no issues with it when it comes to the front triangle. But for full suspension bikes, I am anti-rear triangle internal cable routing. I think it's a shit trend and it needs to stop. Why? Because I guarantee you, if you have a full suspension bike, that they will come, I wouldn't be surprised if half you guys are already there right now, that you're going to have to either change out your bearings or your bushings because they're shot. And it is way easier to do that if you're easily able to remove the rear triangle. And internal routing makes it much more complex. Your only 2 options are you disconnect the rear triangle and then you let it dangle off the cables. And I do have a video that shows me doing that for this particular frame for another bike 2 years ago. I think I did that video. Or even worse, you cut your cables, your brake cable from the lever side because the olive won't fit through. You remove the brake cable, then you remove your shifter cables, and then you disconnect and remove your rear triangle. It's ignorant. It doesn't need to happen. You're making life so much more difficult for full suspension maintenance than it needs to be. It needs to stop. IBIS, honestly, future bikes, just get rid of that. You're going to make your own manufacturing a little bit easier, and ultimately you're going to make our lives a lot easier when it comes to servicing bearings and bushings. Okay? So with that rant being said, let's get into installing the rear brake first from the back to the front. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my caliper and I'm going to mount it, right? So put the cable on the inside of the triangle over here. We're going to take our caliper and we're going to put it in its seat and tie down the screw. We don't need to do it super tight. We're just holding it in place for now. We're going to figure all the details as far as finishing it all later. Okay, so that'll keep it in place. Again, we don't need it to be tight. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to take our cable and we're going to feed it through the first hole. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge because, again, there's a lot of curving on it. So again, the nice thing with this frame, even though I'm not a fan of rear triangle cable routing, when I feed it through, it automatically comes out the other side. Not all frames have this, guys, right? Some frames have no tube inside. It's just a hollow space, and you're going to have to find the cable on the other side and bring it through. So as I feed it through, I have an option. I could feed this completely right now through this section, but considering the curvature and the tension on it, I'm going to immediately put it into the hole towards the front side of the bike and feed it through as a hole so I could avoid potential kinking of the actual cable, right? So basically what I'm going to do now is, as you see, if I keep on going as is right now, it's going to want to kink. But once I get to a certain point, what I'm going to do is take the cable and hold it out like that and then feed it just like that. And it'll twist on itself, on its own, I should say, on the inside. And that is it right there for now. Just leave it as is. So we're at the front of the bike and the cable came out of the hole as I fed it through on its own. I didn't have to find it and put it through, right? And now we have the rest of the cable to deal with. So the next step is to grab our handle. Now, when you grab your handle, make sure you grab the right handle for the right side of the bike, right? So we're working on the rear brake, which would be our right hand in my case, right? We want the emblem on top and the lever on the right side of the emblem. So I know this is the right handle. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to slide it on. Now what I'm going to do for now temporarily is I'm going to take a screwdriver and I'm just going to tighten it on there very lightly. Okay, in fact, let's do it like that, lightly. Okay. Now, next step would be to figure out how deep we want this in here, right? Because that's going to determine how long our cable is going to be. So I know for me that my typical comfort zone is around 150 millimeters from the edge of the handlebar to the inside edge of a brake handle. So what I'm going to do is grab a measuring tape and bring this into about the 150, 152 millimeter mark as a baseline. I'm going to take my measuring tape and I'm going to count. I don't know if you guys can see that. So I'm going to bring the handle into about 150, loosen it a bit, 150 millimeters. Where am I? 100 millimeters and about 150. Let's say somewhere around there. Now I'm going to snug it in there, but I'm not going to make it tight. I'm just going to make it where it doesn't move easily, right? And I'm sort of pitched down so you guys can see it, and well, that's how it would naturally be anyway. So the next step is to figure out how much cable we need. Do we need to cut it a little bit shorter to make it a little bit more comfortable so we don't have too much cable sticking out of the front, or can we leave it as is, right? So the first thing I'm going to do now, just be careful when you take off this plug because oil might come out. In fact, just in case oil does come out. Okay, yep, oil came out just a little bit. Get it all out. We're going to bleed it anyway. We don't want it dripping anywhere, right? Okay, so that's good. Put that on the side. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cable and I'm going to put it all the way in. Okay, all the way to the end because that's where it's going to sit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my handlebar and I'm going to spin it just past the top tube. Why? Because if I ever wipe out, I want to make sure I have enough slack if I wipe out and my whole steering wheel completely turns past the top tube. That's happened to me multiple times. And the last thing you want to have is a very short cable that will do damage, well, to your frame, to your levers, so on and so forth. You want to have a little bit of extra slack. I also want to have a little bit of extra slack because if the day ever came where I wanted to remove the rear triangle completely, well, to do that, I would have to cut this portion of the cable, at least an inch. Why an inch? Because we have the barb on the inside. And that's about the better part of an inch. And every time we cut the cable, well, we make it shorter. If you're very tight on your cable, when you first install it, well, maybe even after your first cable cut, you might have to replace the cable because you won't have enough length for the cable. Again, if you wanted to remove the rear triangle, hence why I'm so anti-rear triangle internal cable routing. I'd rather just move the whole cable in the brake from the rear triangle as opposed to having to cut this cable to get the cable through. And the reason you'd have to cut the cable is because the olive on the end of the cable will not fit through these holes. So you have no choice but to cut the cable in the olive and the olive out of it, basically, right? So in my case over here, believe it or not, I am not all that bad. If I spin it around, I don't have all that much extra slack. I could take out, let's say, an inch, and I'd still have a couple of inches left over for a couple of cuts in the future if needed. So again, I'm going to cut off 1 inch, I decided, right, for starters. I'm going to take my cable cutting tool. All right, you can buy these anywhere. There's many different versions. This is a Avid version. It's an older one, but it still works good. I got no complaints with it. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cable in here. I'm going to try and measure it best I can, about 1 inch from the blade. So let's say somewhere around over there, give or take. That should be good enough. And now I'm just going to press down on it, and boom, my cable is cut. Next, I'm going to want to take a pick, put in the hole, and make sure that it's not squished in any way, right? Just make sure there's no part of the cable that's sticking in the hole to create obstruction, so we're good there. Now, before I put the barb in, I want to measure it one last time. So I'm going to take the cable, I'm going to put in the hole all the way. Again, wrap it around, and I still have a lot of slack. In fact, I got enough slack where I could cut another inch in the future, and I will still have room, additional room that I would need to spin the handlebar around. And I don't have too much cable sticking out in the front end of the bike over there, right? It's a happy medium. And ultimately, I also have room where if I need to move the handle a little bit in or out, again, that 152 is a baseline. I might have to go in maybe 1/2 inch. I might have to come out a little bit, right? We have no idea. That will tell when we set up the bike at the end. So next, we remove the barb, the new barb, and the olive that we're going to use, right, from the packet. We're going to take a tool to install the barb, right? There's many ways to do this. You could literally even use just a hammer, right, by putting the barb in the hole and just tapping it in there with a hammer. Much easier if you do it holding it with a clamp of some sort. But they have tools now, and these are pretty cheap tools. This is an older one, not exactly, it's an older Jaguar tool, so actually quite old, this one. But it still works, it does its job. Essentially, what I'm going to do over here is clamp the hose into the tool, put the barb in it, and, well, actually, let's put the barb in it first. Okay, so we're going to take the barb, let's make it a bit stiff, get it in the camera a little bit hard, and we're going to put it in the hole just to start it for now, right? Best we can, just like that, okay? Get it solid in there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the top of the cable with that 0 up there, all right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the cable in place, just like that. So now, align the hole on that needle on top. Now we can screw this down, and it'll screw the barb, or push the barb, press it, so let me lock down the cable, into the cable. Don't over tighten it, nice and snug. Once we're snug, we loosen it, and we are done. So next, what we're going to do, we're going to grab an 8mm wrench, and we're going to take out this bolt over here that the cable goes into, okay? So we're going to fully remove it. Shouldn't be all that difficult. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, we're going to take this guy out. So now we have our cable. The brake kit came with a cover. The cover is cone shape. We're going to take the narrow part. We're going to put it in first. Then that bolt we just took out, we're going to put that in second. Now we're going to take our olive, and we're going to put our olive on top of that. So next, what we're going to do is we are going to take our bolt and our olive, separate it from the cap. Just leave the cap at the end for now, right? The cover, I should say. We're going to take the cable. We're going to put it all the way in, and we're going to make sure it sits in there, okay? And then we're going to take, hopefully you guys can see this well. Then we're going to take the bolt, or nut, whatever you want to call it, with the olive, and we're going to take it, and we're going to start screwing it in. Now, there's a lot of sealant on it, as you can tell, right? And we're going to start screwing it in by hand, always by hand first, until we can't do it by hand anymore. Grab that 8mm, and we are going to start squishing that olive. That olive is going to create that seal for us. Okay. Now we don't have to do this too tight. Hopefully you can see that well. By the time you see like 3 threads showing, I mean, it'll get hard. Once you have to start using your whole hand like this, you're good. Okay. I mean, you are more than good enough. So that takes care of that. So now technically we could take our cover and we could put it on just to make sure everything fits right. And everything fits right. Ultimately, we are not going to put it on now. We're going to leave it off because we want to make sure when we bleed it that we don't get any leaks coming out of here. All right. So now the rear brake for now is done. We can move on to the front brake. For the front brake, I'm going to start off with putting the lever on first, right? So again, we want to make sure we get it on the right way, which in my case is this way. And I know that for me, it's going to be about 150 millimeters, 52 millimeters, right? Might have to adjust it here and there from that point on. So I'm going to angle it down a little bit, grab my 4 millimeter, put it in, and just keep it snug. Again, this isn't going to be permanent. Now, next step, again, grab a bit of paper towel, take out the plug. Don't need that anymore. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there is already an olive inside the handle, okay? So we're going to loosen this bolt over here. And then we're probably going to need a pick to get, yep, there it is. And this is the nut that I used on the other side. I just don't remember. I might have forgotten to mention it, but there is an olive. I mean, the olive I used on the other side. Now, once again, we're going to take the front cable. We're going to extend it out, try and straighten it out a little bit by, again, putting some pressure on it and rolling it out just to alleviate some of that curving stress. Then we're going to take the caliper. We're going to put it on. Now, this is a pike fork. Pike forks are already preset for 180 millimeter front rotors. That's what I'm going to be using. I don't need any more than that on this bike. So I don't have to worry about an adapter. But if yours is set up for 160, then you would need that adapter in order to bring it to a 180, right? So since I don't need that, I'm going to take the screw, put it in, bottom screw, put it in, screw it down so it doesn't rattle, so you guys don't hear it. Don't tighten it hard. I'm just going to do it hard so it's like somewhat snug so it doesn't rattle while I'm working on it, because the microphone picks everything up just like it did before. Okay, and now we route our cable. So to route the cable, we want to route it on the inside of the left side of the air side of the fork, right? And then what we need to do is put it on this cable holder so it doesn't flap around and move around. That you're going to need a 2.5 millimeter Allen to take out the bolt. That's going to be for most forks, going to be 2.5 millimeters. You might be able to just put it in there. Yep, there we go, right? So we're going to take this guy and we're going to make him relatively snug to the edge, okay? We don't want to give him slack. We want to make him as tight as we can to that edge, and then we're going to take him, we're going to screw him down just like that. Don't over tighten this screw. You will strip the screw and you will have to go in there and retap it. That's very common. Finger tight is all you need. Just keep on going until it gets hard with your fingers. Do not over tighten this. I can't stress that enough. Don't over tighten this. Just use your fingers, okay? So once again, we have a cover for the front one too. We're going to put the cover, the narrow part in first. Then we're going to take our bolt, put the nut part in for the thread sticking out. And then we're going to take our olive and put that on top of the bolt and just let it sit down so we don't lose them. So now we want to figure out how much cable we need to cut. Now, unlike the rear cable, we don't have to worry about the cable wrapping around the frame. The cable always follows the fork, which always follows the lever, right? So we have a little bit more leeway over here. Now, what I usually try and do is make it where the cable sort of meets or lines up with the middle of the frame before I pull it out. So looking here right now, that tells me that I could take off nearly 3 inches, I would say, of cable over here and safely have more than enough room to adjust my lever in different positions and not hit the frame as I'm bouncing around, right? We never want this cable to be too close to the frame because it'll either hit the handlebar or hit the frame, which gets annoying in my opinion. So that's why I like sort of centering it after I come out the cable attachment over here to the fork and then bringing it out towards the lever. So that's what I'm going to do over here. I'm going to cut off the better part of 3 inches, maybe 2.5 inches to start with. So again, I'm going to grab my brake cable cutting tool, grab my measuring tape, measure 2.5 inches, slide it, try and get it somewhere there, and press it to the backside, press down, and done. The cable is cut. So before I put my barb in, again, I'm going to grab a pick. I'm going to make sure that the hole is clear. All right, Then I'm going to grab the barb right here, and I'm going to put it in deep as I can by finger for now. Then I'm going to take the tool again, take the barb, we're going to put it in, we're going to line up the cable to one of these markers. I'm going to line it up to the 0 marker over there, lock it down in place. Okay, lift this guy up since I didn't do it before. Hopefully you guys can see that. Make sure that the barb lines on the pin. That's going to push him in. Hopefully you guys can see that. And then again, I'm just going to screw it in nice and easy. Like I said, these tools help quite a bit, actually. There we go. Till he's snug. Don't over tighten them. We don't need to squeeze them in there. And we are done. All right. Now, once again, we have our olive. We have our nut. We're going to take the cable. We're going to insert it all the way in, and we're going to hold him in there. Okay. Make sure you always put pressure. Again, we don't need the cap yet. Make sure you always put pressure on the cable towards the lever. Put the olive in, and then screw in the nut. But make sure we always put pressure towards the lever. Okay. Just like that. Hopefully, maybe you can see him better like this. Do it by hand as much as you can. Then once again, we grab our 8mm and we start screwing him in. By the time you see, I find usually around 3 threads, you're done for the most part. Again, this should be about, I think it's like 9 Newton meters. A good fist tight. Once it starts getting really hard, well, significantly hard, we have to use your whole fist like this, then you're done. All right. Now, again, we don't need to put our cap on yet because these need to get bled, and we want to make sure that we don't have any leaks when we go through the bleed process. And there you have it, folks. We just installed the Shimano XTR M9100 brake system on an IBIS Ripley V4S frame. I like the way everything turned out. I don't have too much slack in the front. I'm able to turn my handlebar without, any binding. And one thing that I should have mentioned is if you're going to cut your brake cables shorter, don't make it where you can't lift your lever up to get the bleed port to the highest level. It's easier to bleed a system when the bleed port is actually sort of flat, right, or lifted up. I've seen it multiple times throughout the years where people get so crazy as far as cutting their cables and trying to make them as short as possible that their levers are basically locked in this down position, which makes bleeding a little bit more challenging. So for those of you that have never installed a brake system on a frame and have been intimidated by this job, don't be. I guarantee you could do this, guys. This is not a hard job. It just takes a little bit of planning. Make sure you know what type of internal routing you have in your frame, whether it's tube like this one, or if it's just hollow and you have to fish out your cable on the other side. That could be a bit of a pain in the butt, but there's ways to simplify it. Maybe I'll go through that in a different video. The other one, don't ignore the OEM space. Again, there's no difference between retail brakes in a box and the OEM equivalents. The difference is you don't get that box and some of the, manuals and stuff like that in the box, okay? You just get all the main components sent in bags. The next step here is to bleed both brakes. I'm not going to do it in this video. Biggest reason, I already have a brake bleed video for an XTR M9100, but I did it for the front. In fact, all my videos have been front brakes, and I've had multiple requests over the past year to do a brake bleed video for a rear brake. So I'm going to make a dedicated video in order to keep it shorter of a rear video brake bleed for this particular brake over here, okay? So guys, if you like this video, please click that like button, man. Click the subscribe button to see more videos. Click the bell button, ding, in order to get notified when new videos get released and more videos like this are coming. Until then, I hope all's well with all of you, and we will be talking to you soon. Have a good one. Take care.